Hey, Iostax here, and welcome to my in-depth Symmetra guide. Since her rework, Symmetra has gained a lot of popularity. So in this video, I want to go over the topics you can see on screen now. Simply pause the video if you want to read through them. But before we get into that, I want to start out with Symmetra's skillset. In my opinion, aim is completely irrelevant for Symmetra. Movement can be important, especially in duels, and positioning even a little more, but this is more dependent on how you take your fights and on the current situation of your team comp and the game, but more on that later. The most important parts are, in my opinion, game sense on good turret and teleporter placement, which we will go into later as well as knowing when to take fights and how to position yourself. And teamwork is the most important part, since coordinating with your team, which ultimate is more important, and relaying pressure of Reinhardt's shield using your E is one of the defining parts of her new kit. Next, we have Symmetra's learning curve, although this is not as much of a curve, but more of a binary system. There are basically two switches to her, and the first one is a complete uselessness, more on that later. However, after some time, and it's actually not that long of a time, it kind of clicks with you how Symmetra works, and how to properly utilize her kit. And at that moment, you can play her to almost maximum efficiency. Obviously not at a pro level, but he will definitely be a valuable asset to your team. And in the current meta, that is really important. Right here, you can see my stages of Symmetra play. Usually I have more stages, but Symmetra is a very simple character, so I figured 3 would be enough. We have the useless phase, which is simply a Symmetra who dies before getting her ultimate and allowing the enemy team to capture the point. The second stage is the ult bot, where she gets her ultimate up in time, but that's usually where her usefulness ends. And then we have the killing machine, although that term may be a little exaggerating, where she not only provides the team with her ultimate, but cleverly uses her abilities to apply pressure on the enemy team. This not only includes her weapon, but also clever usage of her right click and her E ability. Let's start things off with one of the more obvious questions, which is her role. In my opinion, Symmetra is more of a utility DPS. A lot of people are asking themselves who on the team they should replace, and I think this is the wrong mindset. This concept of running a 2-2-2 setup or a 4-2 setup with quad tank and 2 supports may apply for the pro meta and for the majority of competitive games too. However, with Symmetra you need to think a little bit differently. Symmetra works really well with a Reinhardt thanks to her E, and I wouldn't really call her a support. Especially now that Ana and Lucio are still very strong, she can't really replace either of those. So in my opinion, you should still run 2 supports and run Symmetra as some sort of, co-utility character. She can't really heal anyone. Also, while she can alleviate pressure from the tanks, she doesn't really replace one. So you definitely shouldn't replace one of your tanks for her, especially in this tank heavy meta. My personal favorite comp with her is running a double support setup with an Ana and a Lucio, a double tank setup, preferably with something like a D.Va and a Reinhardt, maybe a Winston, and a single DPS character. Flankers are really good for this, since they benefit from her shield, more on that later, but currently Soldier is just incredibly strong, so he goes a long way. Alternatively, you can just ditch the Soldier and go for a triple tank comp. You don't really steal Ana's ult charge, since you can't heal your tanks. However, they still benefit from your kit, and you can deal a lot of damage, which nullifies the need for a dedicated DPS character. Regarding her role in the pro meta, this is a little bit different. In the pro meta, a quad tank setup at the moment is very popular. Next to the triple tank setup, the only DPS that sees play is Soldier, to be honest. He deals a lot of damage and he has the range in order to deal with tanks since they outrange him. Another very likable pick on the DPS slot is Pharah at the moment, because none of the tanks can really outrange her, and Soldier, while he may seem very effective against Pharah, simply lacks the range since his damage up fall off is insane, and pairing Pharah with the Mercy makes her really valuable. I just wanted to mention this so that you can reconsider her place in a team when you think about competitive match or a professional match. Next, let's go over some turret placement. In this section, I will cover the maps Icon Vault, Numbani, King's Row, Hollywood, Volskaya, Anubis, and Hanamura. I hope that these are enough examples so that you will be able to apply them to other maps and maybe future upcoming maps like Oasis. The idea with placing her turrets at the start of the game is to place them near their spawn to get ult charge. The main objective is to not die until you have your shield generator or your teleporter up. Also make sure to never stack sentry turrets, always spread them out. You don't want to kill people with them, all you want to do is get ult charge from it. Also, there are a few rules for placing turrets. Make sure that the enemies need to turn around in order to delay them, make sure that they are out of line of sight, that they are at their maximum range, and that they are all spread out so they aren't vulnerable to AoE attacks. Right here I'm going to show you how I place my turrets at the start of an Icon Vault match. The first turret is placed behind this flower pot because it's hard for the enemies to see. The same thing applies for this little tank in the ground. Next I place 2 turrets next to the entrance. This is my primary source of ult charge, and the fact that there are 2 means that they can't AoE them. In case they push further up, I place 1 on the little towery thing here, and then 1 behind the table that lays on the ground in order to cover the health pack next to it. Here you can see my turret placement on Numbani. I place my first one on the truck near the main slope and 1 in the little building next to it. Then over here I'm going to place 3 turrets, 1 on the bus and 2 on the little bridge. Keep in mind that you need to jump up in order to reach this place. And then I place 1 next to the trash can in the building when they pass it. This gives me a lot of ult charge right at the start of the game. Right here, let's go over King's Row. I place my first 2 turrets right next to the exit, similar to Icon Vault. I place 1 turret on the main bus. Then I enter the building to the left and place 1 next to the big health pack. This flank road is really popular, so I place 1 turret over there. And I use my last turret to cover the main choke. Let's go over to Hollywood, which is one of my favorite maps. I really like to place my turrets on the cars over here, so I place 1 on the blue one, 1 below the window in the building so that the enemies can't see it, 1 on the green one, 1 next to this little flower pot, although I should have placed that a little lower, 1 next to the blue car in case they want to go via the right side, and 1 on top of the entrance to the main building. Let's go over Volskaya next. Volskaya is actually one of my favorite Symmetra only maps. I place 1 next to the car near the entrance, 1 next to this tree, which blocks it from vision and takes them directly out of spawn, 1 behind this little block next to the river because it's hard to see, 1 inside of the building in case they decide to push. You can either place a second turret here as well or place it to the left on the other tree, and then I place my last one on the other side. Now this doesn't get me as much ult charge, but it covers the left side in case someone decides to walk there. On Anubis you need to be very careful with your time. I like to place my turrets very offensively, so 1 to the statue and 1 in the little room with the health pack. I place 1 near the well before they even start to push in. I place 1 in the front of the arc, 1 in the side room if they decide to walk via the left, and then in case they decide to rush via the right, I place 1 right there next to the health pack as well. One of Symmetra's strongest maps is the first point of Hanamura. I like to place 2 turrets directly on their spawn, so that I can get some quick ult charge right here, since it's relatively hard to reach those turrets. I place 1 turret next to the truck in case they pass it, and 1 on this little drink dispenser. 1 on the bridge right in front of it. I misplaced it a little, it should be a little closer to the beams, and then 1 behind the curtains right in this building, which makes it really difficult to see. I hope that this gave you a pretty solid idea of how I like to place my turrets personally. Also keep in mind that I use general rules in order to come up with these, so this should be applicable to any upcoming maps. Next up, teleporter placement. Again, here I am only going over a few maps, but I hope that it will be comprehensible enough and again applicable to any maps you want to play Symmetra on. I am going to show you my favorite ult spots for Hollywood, Anubis and Hanamura. Keep in mind that these spots are the same whether you use the teleporter pad or the shield generator. Let's start things off with Hollywood. My first spot where I usually place it, although this is a little clutch and I only use it if I really have to, is behind this little staircase behind the point. This is personally my favorite spot, and it's in the little bistro next to the point, because it's really difficult for the enemies to get there. And this is the one that I see most often. Symmetra players on Hollywood tend to go behind the big door leading to the second phase of the game and place their turret directly there. However, I think this is very vulnerable to Winstons or Divas flying over the gate. Next up, we have Anubis on the first point. My favorite spot is directly behind the point in this little building, although this is also very clutch and should only be used if you really have to. My second favorite spot is next to the health pack, on the right side of the point, looking from the defender's perspective. This is a little easier to get to than the previous spot, but I still like it. This is the most popular spot for Symmetra. However, I think that most divas look there first, so it's become quite vulnerable. And on point B, my favorite spot, especially for the shield generator, is directly behind the point. However, keep in mind that you should definitely cover this with some of your turrets, since you don't really need them elsewhere. You can look at the turret placement I use right here and simply copy it for your own games. And next up we have Hanamura. Right behind the point, right over here, is my favorite spot for the teleporter. Some people place it either in the staircase building next to the point or a little further up. However, I feel like this is more covered from the enemies, even though the teammates have to walk a little longer. Next, let's go over Symmetra's weapon mechanics. Right click of Symmetra's gun fires a little ball, and that's her primary way of getting ult charge. Keep in mind that a lower charged ball deals less damage. However, a lower charged ball and a fully charged ball travel at the same speed. Right click requires up to 20 ammo and deals between 25 and 125 damage. Symmetra's laser is a little more interesting since it charges up 3 times, once per second. At level 3 she deals 30 DPS, at level 2 60 DPS, and at level 3 120 DPS. Her ammo usage isn't reliant on her weapon's level. It always requires 8 ammo per second, and reloading doesn't reset her charge if you immediately continue firing at a target. Also, shooting objects works to charge it up, for example a May wall. Right here you can see her weapon stages in action. Top right is level 3, top left is level 2, and the bottom one is starting at level 1. All of these clips play back at 0.5 playback speed, so that's half the, it's playback speed, shut up! Let's quickly go over Symmetra on attack maps. In my opinion, Symmetra is incredibly weak on payload maps, because since the objective is moving around, her teleporter doesn't have much use. While the shield generator does, it still isn't really that viable, because it's very difficult for her to get ult charge with her turrets, because after all she needs to push in and the enemies can just stay where they are, making her turrets essentially useless. The same thing applies on assault maps, like for instance Anubis or the first point of King's Row. On attack she just doesn't have the means to get her ultimate up in a decent times, and her team just lacks the pushing power that they would have with another tank instead of Symmetra. Symmetra on attack can be fun to play, but it is in my opinion not a viable pick, and you should honestly just pick something else. Don't waste a spot on your team for her. This next one is more of a myth from past times, and it's about reacting as Symmetra when you lose the first point. Now, before her rework, Symmetra lost a lot of her strength when she lost the first point, because her teleporter wasn't as useful anymore. However, in my opinion, her rework and her new shield generator made her very effective even in the later stages of the game. Especially on maps like Anubis, the shield generator can be placed very efficiently and close to spawn, which not only provides great coverage to your team in terms of shielding, but it also makes it incredibly difficult for the enemy team to deal with it. On some maps, like Volskaya Industries, in my opinion, she becomes even stronger on the point compared to the first one, because her shield generator increases the ability to fight off the enemy team by a lot more compared to the teleporter on the first point, where usually your teammates would just run back in, trickling one by one, and this just gave the enemy team more ultimate charge in order to snowball the second point. So yes, all in all, in my opinion, Symmetra definitely doesn't have to swap once you lose the first point. Taking fights as Symmetra is one of the more difficult topics. If you are bad at it, this will just lead to you dying often, taking unnecessary risks, and not getting your ultimate up in time. However, if you take the correct fights and execute them properly, which we'll go into later, you can actually reap a lot of benefits. There are 5 cases where you should take a fight as Symmetra. For one, if you're incredibly charged up, for instance thanks to a D.Va mech, a Winston bubble or a Mei wall. If you need to get your teleporter up quickly, for instance if the enemies are about to take the point and you have your ultimate at like 90%, then it may be worth it to just quickly attack someone and get it. If you see a free pick opportunity, so for instance if one of the enemies overextends before his team is with him, you can just throw out your shield and engage on him. If you have the support from your team, so for instance if you have a Zenyatta orb on you, or a Mercy following you around, or a Zarya bubble, then you can take a lot of fights actually. Or if you are buffed by your own shield generator, because winning a fight as a 275 HP Symmetra is actually not that difficult, especially against DPS characters and supports, so it is definitely worth taking the risk there. This is a topic that I see a lot of Symmetra players do wrong, and it's teleporter usage. By this I don't know when, to place the teleporter or where to place it, but simply when to walk through it. If you have a teleporter up, leave it to targets that matter. For instance, if you only have one charge left, a D.Va that gets to the point with the last charge is more valuable if you take it yourself, since she can stall. Also, only use it if you need it. If the fight is already over and you have no pressure to get back quick, don't use the teleporter to save time. Keep it up for when you really need it. Most of the time as Symmetra, you should only use your teleporter if you have enough charges left and your team really needs you. Otherwise, leave it to priority teammates. Even if you don't play Symmetra yourself, having a Symmetra on your team who has her teleporter up and knowing about this can be really important. For example, if you play Torbjorn and you already have your turret up, then you can just use Molten Core from the spawn and not waste the teleporter charge, and instead maybe give that to the Mercy, who has a res up and can res the teammates on the point by walking quickly through it. This way you seriously help out your Symmetra and get a lot more value out of her teleporter. Let's ask ourselves the question, when the teleporter and when the shield generator is more useful. If you don't know, you can press Q to switch between these two ultimates and they share the same ult charge. In my opinion, you should use the teleporter when you know that your team won't benefit from the shield. For instance, if you have a very tank heavy comp, then the shields aren't really as valuable compared to when you have a double DPS comp, for example. Also, use your teleporter to clutch a point. When the enemies are about to overrun you, then the teleporter is a lot more useful compared to the shield generator. This can very often save you a point when you thought that it was already gone. If you, however, are already set up and you don't really need the teleporter in the foreseeing future, then placing the shield generator is very valuable. Also, it goes without saying that using the shield generator on the second point on 2CP maps or on the last point of hybrid and payload maps is a lot more valuable than the teleporter, since the walk back times aren't really as long. Overall, the shield generator is insanely OP, however there are still some cases where the teleporter is really strong, and knowing when to use which can make the difference between a win or a loss. Next to picking Symmetra in attack, a lot of people like to play her on King of the Hill. My opinion, Symmetra is a super risky pick on King of the Hill. If you get the point first, you can set your turrets up and your ultimate, and it can actually work really well, especially since picks like Genji, for example, are very popular on King of the Hill, especially in lower ratings, and Symmetra is really effective against that. However, she is extremely reliant on a Lucio to get to the point first. If the enemies don't run a Lucio, and you have one, then Symmetra can place up her turrets and win most of the fights. However, Lucio is usually picked anyways, so you don't really have to think about this too much. On King of the Hill, you should never use your teleporter. The shield generator is just a lot more useful. Also, there aren't really a lot of good spots to place your ultimate, so you need to be careful about that. However, the shield generator can be placed further back from the point, which means that the enemies need to overextend most of the time in order to destroy it, thus leaving their team vulnerable to be overrun by you. Symmetra on King of the Hill works, but it's not recommended. Let's go over how you should place Symmetra in a fight. In a fight, you should never place your turrets. Your gun is a lot more useful, and the same rule applies for Torbjorn, for example, where he should simply use his rivet gun instead of replacing his turret or upgrading it, unless he obviously has his ultimate. For Symmetra, this is a lot more binary. Simply ignore your turrets, and instead of setting them up and them being destroyed immediately by AoE, just use your gun. Also make sure to use your E cleverly. It travels at the same speed as a regular character, so that means every character besides Tracer and Genji, since they have bonus movement speed as far as I know. And you can use this to push onto enemies and chase them with your laser. Also, use your E to block abilities like Diva ultimates, or to block your team from abilities like Zarya ultimates, for example. When you are fighting as Symmetra and you use your laser, try not to jump around. I am still guilty of this myself, just because it's a really bad habit. However, this makes my movement incredibly predictable and allows good players to punish me immediately. Also, try to remain at your maximum range when fighting. A close range character, like Reaper or Diva for example, benefit a lot more from the close range than you do. And you won't really be able to win a duel against a Diva unless you remain at maximum range for the whole duration of the fight. This is key, and it can be a little difficult at first, but if you actively think about your positioning in the fight and whether you stood too close or too far away, can be a very valuable lesson for future games. 2 more little tips for Symmetra. For one, try to place your teleporter in a way so that it faces the objective. This way you don't disorient teammates running towards the teleporter and, not finding the objective because they need to turn. And also keep in mind that your shield generator completely ignores line of sight. Alright, that does it for my in-depth Symmetra guide. Symmetra is a really strong character at the moment, and learning her is well worth it. She still has limited cases, and in my opinion is completely useless on attack, unless you are playing at a rating lower than where you should be. And usually if you win with an attack Symmetra, that win isn't really because of you, but it's despite you. I hope that these tips help you. In case you have any more questions, or maybe you are a Symmetra main and you found a flaw in my argumentation, then please feel free to share them in the comments. Also, sharing this video with others helps to further increase the spread of it and allows more people to see it. My name is Shoutout, and I'd like to thank you for learning.